Mason Daniels sat alone in the damaged escape pod, drifting through space. His heart pounded against his chest as he watched the wreckage of his ship, the Adventurer, float away, broken into pieces. The attack had come without warning. His ship had been ambushed by a hostile alien fleet, and now he was stranded in the cold emptiness of space. The pod's life support systems were failing. Oxygen was running low. Soon, he would lose consciousness, then drift off into nothing. Mason had been an engineer aboard a small civilian vessel tasked with exploring distant star systems. He had never expected his life to end this way, abandoned in space with no hope of rescue. The sudden chaos of the attack had left him powerless. His hands trembled as he tried to patch up the pod's communication system, but there was no signal. His eyes closed for a moment, exhaustion taking over. He tried to stay awake, but the darkness pulled him in. Suddenly, a soft beeping echoed from the pod's control panel, breaking through the fog of his thoughts. His eyes snapped open. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and glanced at the screen, confused. The pod was receiving a signal, but from where? Before he could react, the pod shuddered. A loud bang rattled the walls, and Mason was thrown back into his seat. His pulse raced. Had the enemy found him? Was he about to die in this tiny, helpless pod? But no. The pod's exterior lights flickered, and something else was happening. A strange, unfamiliar hum filled the air. Mason stared in shock as the pod's hatch began to open. Slowly, despite the broken systems. Outside, an enormous alien ship loomed, its smooth, dark surface gleaming against the stars. It was like nothing Mason had ever seen, sleek and beautiful, with sharp curves and glowing lines of blue light. Is this real? Mason whispered to himself, barely able to believe what he was seeing. The pod was pulled gently into the ship's docking bay by some kind of invisible force. It wasn't like any tractor beam he had ever read about. It felt almost delicate, like someone was caring for him, rather than simply rescuing him. The hatch opened completely, revealing a figure. At first, Mason thought it was a woman, but there was something different about her. She wasn't human. She had smooth, dark skin that shimmered slightly, and her hair flowed like liquid silver, reflecting the light in strange patterns. Her eyes glowed a soft green, and there was a sharpness to her gaze, a focus that seemed both distant and intense at the same time. "Who are you?" Mason asked, his voice weak from fear and exhaustion. The alien woman didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, her movements graceful, almost like she was gliding. She knelt beside him, her eyes scanning his face with an intensity that made Mason feel like she could see straight through him. "I am Era," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "You were dying. I saved you." Mason blinked, confused. "Saved me? But why? Who are you? Where am I?" She ignored his barrage of questions for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are on my ship, and you are alive, which is the important thing." Her tone wasn't cold, but it was distant. She was calm, almost detached, as though saving him was just a small part of something much bigger. Mason wanted to ask more, but his strength was failing. He felt his eyelids growing heavy. "You must be strong enough to listen," Era said, her voice cutting through the fog in his mind. "There is a price for my help." Mason's eyes snapped open. "A price?" He repeated, his voice trembling. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, weak. "What do you mean? You're telling me there's a catch?" Era's gaze softened just a little, though her expression remained serious. "Yes. I did not save you out of kindness. I have my reasons, just as you have yours for seeking out the stars." Mason struggled to focus, his mind clouded by the trauma of the attack and the strange new reality he was in. What do you want from me?" Era stood up, turning away as she spoke. "That will come later. For now, you will rest. You are safe for the moment." "But," Mason began to protest, but his body couldn't keep up. His eyelids drooped, and his head sank back into the seat. "I will explain everything," Era said softly, though there was an edge to her words. "But only when you are ready. You owe me nothing now. But when the time comes, you will understand." Before Mason could respond, the room around him faded to black, and he fell into a deep sleep. Mason woke slowly. His mind felt foggy and his body heavy. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The last thing he recalled was being in the escape pod, drifting through space, moments away from dying. But now he was lying on a soft bed in a strange, unfamiliar room. The walls were smooth and metallic, with soft blue lights that flickered gently overhead. The air smelled different, almost like fresh rain. He tried to sit up, but his head swam, and his muscles protested. His body still felt weak. He glanced around, trying to understand what was happening. A soft voice broke through his confusion. "You are awake. Good." Mason turned toward the sound. There, standing in the doorway, was Era. She looked just as calm and collected as she had before, her dark skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. Her silver hair fell around her face in graceful waves, and her green eyes locked onto his with that same intense focus. Where am I?" Mason croaked, his voice still weak. He cleared his throat, trying to sound more in control. "What is this place?" Era stepped into the room, her movements as fluid as water. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to a small table at the far side of the room and picked up a small device. She held it in her hands, studying it for a moment, before finally turning back to Mason. "This is my ship. It is called the HFY," she said, her voice calm and steady. "We are far from your world now." Mason tried to make sense of her words. The HFY. He had never heard of it. His mind raced. "How far are we? I mean, how did you find me?" Era set the device down on the table and approached him, her expression unreadable. "I found you because I was searching for you," she said, her tone still matter-of-fact. "I knew that you would be in danger. And now, you are in my debt." Mason frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "In your debt?" He tried to sit up again, and this time, he managed to do so, though his head still throbbed. "What do you mean? You didn't save me because you owed me something, did you?" Era's lips barely twitched, but it was enough to show that she had heard his question. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Not in the way you might think. I saved you because I needed your help, just as you will need mine." Mason blinked. "Help? What kind of help? I'm just a guy from Earth, a simple engineer. Why would you need me?" Era's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "You think you are simple, but you are not. Humans have something the galaxy lacks: creativity, ingenuity. You think outside the box, even when the box is no longer there." Her eyes glinted with a spark of something Mason couldn't quite place. "I need you for something important." Mason was still trying to piece things together. "I don't understand. What could I possibly do for you? I'm not some hero or warrior. I'm just trying to survive." Era didn't seem to be bothered by his confusion. She looked at him with the same calm expression, as though her words were simply a fact of the universe. "You may not realize it, but your skills, your resourcefulness will be crucial in the coming days. You will learn more in time. But for now, rest. You are weak, and we have much to do." Mason wanted to argue, to press her for more information, but his body was telling him otherwise. The bed beneath him was comfortable, and his eyes were already feeling heavy again. He wasn't sure if he could trust Era. Her mysterious words, her strange calmness, and her alien nature all made him feel uneasy, but he was too tired to fight it. Era watched him silently for a moment, before turning to leave the room. "Sleep. When you wake, I will explain more. We both have much to prepare for." As Era left, the door closed softly behind her, and Mason was alone again. The silence in the room was deafening, and his thoughts spun like a whirlwind. What had he gotten himself into? He had been saved from certain death by an alien who didn't seem to care about him, except for something he couldn't yet understand. There was a price, she had said. But what was it? What did she want from him? Mason lay back in bed, his mind racing with questions and doubts. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. Slowly, he closed his eyes, hoping to escape the thoughts that haunted him. But sleep did not come easily. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, and for a brief moment, Mason thought he heard someone talking, whispering. But then it stopped, and everything fell silent once more. He wasn't sure if it was real or if he was just imagining it, but something told him that his life, whatever was left of it, was about to change forever. Mason awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside his room. The steady rhythm of the steps was calming, almost soothing. His body still ached, but he had managed to get some sleep. He rubbed his eyes and sat up in bed, trying to shake off the lingering fog in his mind. The room around him was quiet, and the soft hum of the ship filled the air. It was so different from the harsh silence of space, the emptiness he had almost died in. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up, slowly. The pain in his muscles was dull but present. He was still weak, but the exhaustion that had weighed him down was starting to fade. He had to find out more about Era and why she had saved him. What did she mean by a price? What did she want from him? As if on cue, the door slid open, and Era stepped into the room. She looked as calm and composed as always, her silver hair flowing behind her. Her green eyes met his, studying him for a moment. "Good. You are awake," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "I hope you are feeling better." Mason nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure about that. His body was still tired, and his mind was filled with questions. I don't understand," he began, his voice a little shaky. "You saved me. You said there was a price. But what does that mean? What do you want from me?" Era regarded him silently for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. It was clear she was measuring him, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "Your skills are valuable," she said simply. "Your people, humans, are known for their ability to build, to create things that others cannot. Your creativity is why I saved you." Mason frowned. "I don't get it. I'm just an engineer. I fix things. What could I possibly do for you that's so important?" Era stepped closer, her presence imposing yet oddly comforting. "It is not just about fixing things. You will need to help me stop a war. A war that could destroy not just my people, but your people as well." Mason's heart skipped a beat. "A war? But why me? Why would you trust me with something so big?" Era's gaze softened slightly, though it still held a seriousness that Mason couldn't ignore. "Because I have no other choice. There are few who can do what you can, and I have already made my choice. Your fate is now tied to mine." Mason's mind spun as he tried to process her words. A war? Destruction. He was just an ordinary man, a mechanic from Earth. He had no idea how to stop a war. He wasn't a soldier or a leader. He was just trying to survive. "Who are you fighting?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who's the enemy?" Era took a deep breath, her eyes distant, as if she were recalling a painful memory. "The enemy is a warlord named Cavil. He is a tyrant, a ruthless leader of a vast army. He seeks to conquer entire systems, and now he has set his sights on my people. If we do not stop him, he will wipe us out. But he does not stop there. He plans to take your world as well." Mason's stomach churned. "My world? Earth?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Why would he want Earth? We're nothing special." Era's eyes were hard, as if the truth she was about to share was something Mason wasn't ready to hear. Cavil's power comes from ancient technology, something he discovered long ago. It is a weapon that could destroy entire planets, and he has begun using it to conquer the galaxy. Your world is not as safe as you think. He has already set his eyes on it. Mason's head was spinning. The weight of Era's words settled on him like a heavy stone. He had only just barely survived a deadly attack, and now he was being asked to help stop a galactic warlord from wiping out entire worlds, including his own. He felt the cold rush of fear, but it was mixed with a strange sense of determination. There was no going back. His life had changed in an instant, and he didn't know if he could live with himself if he turned his back on this mission. How can I help?" he asked, his voice low but steady. He didn't feel like a hero, but maybe, just maybe, he could be useful. Era's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "That is the question, isn't it? You are not alone in this. I will guide you, but you must trust me. We must find the weapon Cavil is using, destroy it, and stop him before it is too late." Mason took a deep breath, his mind still racing. "And what happens after we stop him? What happens to me?" Era's expression hardened, the smile fading. "There is no going back. The price you will pay is not one you can easily undo. But if you choose to help, if you choose to stand by my side, then your life will never be the same." Mason swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew he couldn't turn back. He was already in too deep. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "I'll help. I don't know how, but I'll help you." Era nodded, her green eyes studying him one last time. "Good. The first step begins now. We must prepare." Mason felt a mix of fear and determination fill him. The mission ahead would be dangerous, but it was his only chance to make things right. His old life was gone, and there was no turning back. He was already part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined, and there was no way to escape it now. Mason's mind buzzed with questions, but there was no time for answers. Era was already moving forward, her calm, purposeful demeanor showing no signs of hesitation. She led him through the halls of her ship, the Azura, a vast and sleek vessel that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The walls were smooth, almost like liquid, reflecting the soft blue light that pulsed along their surface. Everything inside the ship was precise and well organized, but there was an unsettling feeling to it all. Mason couldn't shake the thought that he had been thrust into something far beyond his understanding. "Where are we going?" Mason asked, trying to match her pace as he walked beside her. His legs still felt weak, but he pushed forward, determined to keep up. Era glanced over at him, her expression unreadable. "To the command center. We must prepare for the next phase of our mission. Time is running out." "Mission? What exactly are we doing?" Mason's voice carried a mix of frustration and confusion. "You keep talking about Cavil and stopping him, but how exactly are we supposed to do that? I'm not a soldier. I'm just an engineer. I don't know anything about fighting wars." Era stopped walking and turned to face him, her green eyes locking onto his with that same focused intensity. "You are not here to fight battles with weapons, Mason," she said calmly. "You are here to use your mind, your skills. What you can do is far more important than anything a soldier can do. I need you to build something." Mason blinked. "Build something? I don't even know what we're up against. How am I supposed to build something without knowing what it's for?" "You will know soon enough," Era replied. She turned back and continued walking. "First, we must locate Cavil's weapon. Then we will plan. But we cannot do this without you. Your kind is capable of things that others cannot even imagine." Mason followed her down a long hallway that led to a large room filled with holographic displays and various alien technology. The room hummed with energy, and Mason could feel the power of the ship around him. This was not a place for ordinary people. This was a place for those who commanded the stars. In the center of the room, a massive holographic map of the galaxy hovered in the air, showing countless star systems, planets, and the dark void of space. Era walked to the center of the room and activated a control panel. The map shifted, zooming in on a distant red-colored planet near the edge of the galaxy. "This is where Cavil is hiding," Era said, her voice steady. "This planet is his stronghold. We will strike there." Mason studied the map, his mind racing. "And you want me to build something that can take down his stronghold? How do you know I can do that?" Era's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I have seen the way humans think. You will find a way. If anyone can do it, it is you." Mason swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled heavily on him. He had no idea how to take down an entire stronghold. He was just an engineer, not a war strategist. But Era had placed her trust in him, and he wasn't about to back down. There was no turning back now. "All right," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But first, I need to know more about Cavil and his weapon. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Era stepped closer to the holographic map and zoomed in on the red planet. "Cavil's weapon is an ancient device, one that predates even my people. It is a weapon of mass destruction, capable of obliterating entire cities with a single blast. It draws its power from a rare energy source that is nearly impossible to replicate. That is why it has made Cavil so dangerous." Mason felt a chill run down his spine. A weapon like that was beyond anything he had ever encountered. The idea of facing it head-on seemed impossible. How do we even begin to stop something like that? Mason asked, his voice trembling slightly. Era turned back to face him, her eyes steady. "We find the weapon's power source. If we can destroy that, we can disable the weapon. Without its power, Cavil will be vulnerable." Mason nodded slowly, his mind beginning to process the information. "And you think I can build something that can destroy it?" "I know you can," Era said simply. "But first, we need to get close enough to do the job. And for that, we need to move quickly. Cavil's forces are already searching for us." Mason glanced around the room, taking in the alien technology that surrounded him. He had always thought of himself as a skilled engineer, but this was different. This was the kind of problem that required more than just tools and knowledge. It required creativity, something humans had in abundance. "Okay," Mason said, his voice steadier now. "I'll help, but I need some time to think. I can't just rush into this without a plan." Era gave a small nod of approval. "Time is what we have little of, but I will give you what you need. We move when you are ready." Mason took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the situation settle in. He didn't know if he was truly ready for what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn back. This wasn't just about saving himself anymore. This was about saving his world, his people, and the future of the galaxy. As he looked at the holographic map of Cavil's stronghold, Mason's mind began to work. There had to be a way. There always was. He just needed to find it. Mason sat at a table in the command center, his hands pressed against his temples as he tried to focus. The holographic map of Cavil's stronghold still floated in the air, spinning slowly. His mind raced with ideas, but none of them seemed good enough. He had never dealt with anything like this before. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The pressure was overwhelming. He wasn't just trying to fix a broken machine or solve a simple problem. He was being asked to destroy a weapon powerful enough to wipe out entire cities, and possibly even entire planets. He was supposed to build something to stop it. Era stood nearby, watching him silently. She had given him space to think, but Mason could feel her presence in the room. He knew she was waiting for him to come up with a plan. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. "You're thinking too hard," Era finally said, her voice soft but sharp with wisdom. "You are trying to force a solution. Stop. Let the answer come to you." Mason looked up at her, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. "I don't know how to stop a weapon like that. How do you just let it come?" Era gave a small smile. "You already know what needs to be done. You just have to trust your instincts. Humans are not bound by rules. You are free to think beyond what others can imagine." Mason let out a long breath. It felt like a strange kind of advice, but deep down, he knew she was right. He had spent so much time trying to think logically, trying to find the perfect answer. But sometimes, the best solutions weren't the ones that made sense at first. Sometimes, you just had to act. He turned back to the map, his eyes narrowing as he studied the red planet again. Cavill's stronghold was well protected, surrounded by layers of defense. But there was something about the way it was set up that didn't feel right. The weapon was important to Cavill, but he wasn't the only one with powerful technology. Era's people had their own ancient secrets, things that could help them level the playing field. Mason's mind shifted into gear. He had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. But first, he needed information. He needed to understand more about the weapon and how it worked. He needed to know its weaknesses. "We need to get inside Cavill's stronghold," Mason said, his voice steady with new resolve. "We need to see the weapon for ourselves. I need to understand how it works." Era's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Agreed, but it will not be easy. Cavill's forces are strong, and they are constantly on the move. We need to act fast." Mason nodded. "We don't have time to waste. I have an idea, but we need to get closer to the stronghold first. If we can infiltrate their systems, maybe we can find a way to disable the weapon before it's too late." Era raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to infiltrate their systems?" Mason stood up, walking over to a console near the wall. His fingers flew across the controls, pulling up a series of blueprints for the stronghold. "I'm not sure yet, but we might be able to hack into their communication network. If we can access their mainframe, we might be able to gather more intel, or at least get a glimpse of how their security is set up." He paused, looking at Era. "I'll need your help. Your knowledge of alien technology could be the key to making this work." Era stepped forward, studying the blueprints on the screen. "I can help with the systems, but I will need you to guide me. I do not know how your technology works as well as you do." Mason nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. For the first time since all this began, he felt like they might actually have a chance. With Era's expertise and his own skills, they could find a way in. They could figure this out. "We'll need to act fast," Mason said. "If Cavill's forces are as strong as you say, we can't afford to wait. The longer we take, the more we put ourselves in danger." Era agreed. "We will move quickly then. I will begin gathering the necessary tools to help you." As Era walked away, Mason stood there, staring at the blueprints. His mind was already working, calculating the risks and weighing the possibilities. There were so many unknowns, but they had no choice but to move forward. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. He thought about Earth, his home, his family, his friends, everything he had left behind. They were depending on him now, whether they knew it or not. He had never asked for this. He had never imagined that his life would take such a drastic turn. But here he was, standing on the edge of something far greater than he could have ever anticipated. Mason's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was firm. There was no turning back now. He had to help Era. He had to help stop Cavill. He had to save his world. With a final glance at the blueprints, Mason turned to Era, who was already working at another console. The countdown had begun, and there was no time to waste. The hours passed quickly, and Mason could feel the tension rising in the air. His heart raced as he worked alongside Era, his mind constantly whirring with calculations and plans. Together, they gathered the necessary tools and prepared the ship, but Mason couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Cavill's forces were closing in on them. Every minute they waited gave him a stronger hold on the galaxy. "You ready?" Era's voice broke through his thoughts. Mason turned and nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." She smiled, though it was brief. "Good. We leave now." The two of them moved quickly, making their way to the hangar. Era led the way, her movements sure and quick, and Mason followed as fast as he could, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He knew this was the moment that would define everything. There was no going back. They reached the hangar, where a small shuttle awaited them. It was sleek and built for speed, the perfect ship for a covert mission. Era didn't hesitate. She stepped into the cockpit and began powering up the systems. "Are you sure we'll be able to get in undetected?" Mason asked, taking the seat beside her. Era didn't look up as she worked, but her voice was calm. "We will. My people have their ways. And you have your own talent for working with technology." Mason couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt creeping in. He had never done anything like this before. In the past, his work had always been about fixing machines, not infiltrating enemy strongholds. But this was bigger. This was about survival. This was about stopping a warlord from destroying everything Mason held dear. As the shuttle lifted off, Mason watched the Azura grow smaller in the distance. The vastness of space stretched out in every direction, endless and silent. He couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. Cavil's stronghold wasn't just a military base. It was a fortress, a place of unimaginable power. And they were about to land right in the heart of it. "We need to disable their sensors first," Era said, pulling up a map of the stronghold's defenses. "Once we're inside the perimeter, we can take it from there." Mason nodded, trying to focus. They would be going in blind, with no idea of what awaited them inside the fortress. But they had no choice. They couldn't afford to waste time. The shuttle sped through space, moving faster than Mason had ever experienced. The stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewport. The red planet loomed closer, and the stronghold came into view. It was a massive structure, stretching across the surface of the planet like a jagged wound in the land. The place was heavily guarded, with turrets and defense systems surrounding it in every direction. "We'll have to land on the outskirts," Era said. "That's where the weakest defenses are. Once we're on the ground, we'll move quickly. We can't afford to be seen." Mason's stomach twisted. This was it. They were about to step into the lion's den. The shuttle's landing gear touched down with a soft thud, and Mason's heart skipped a beat. They had made it inside. Now the real work began. Era powered down the shuttle and motioned for Mason to follow. Together, they made their way to the rear hatch. It opened with a hiss, and they stepped out into the cold, dry air of the planet's surface. The stronghold loomed in the distance, casting a long shadow over the barren landscape. The ground was cracked and dry, littered with debris from previous battles. But there was no time to waste. They needed to move fast. Era led the way, her eyes scanning the surroundings as she moved with purpose. Mason followed close behind, doing his best to keep up. The silence of the planet was unnerving, and every footstep seemed to echo louder than it should. They reached the outer perimeter of the stronghold within minutes. Era didn't hesitate. She moved to a small control panel hidden in the rocks and began to work. Her fingers flew across the keys as she hacked into the stronghold's security systems. Mason kept watch, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. The minutes stretched on as Era worked. Finally, she stepped back and gave a nod. "We're in," she said. Mason's breath caught in his throat. They had made it. Now they just had to find the weapon and disable it before it was too late. Era motioned for him to follow, and they slipped inside the stronghold. The walls were cold and metallic, and the air was thick with the hum of machinery. They moved quickly, avoiding the main hallways and sticking to the shadows. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall as guards passed by, but Era was quick, leading them through the maze of corridors with ease. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the heart of the stronghold. In front of them was a massive door, reinforced with steel and guarded by 2 heavily armed soldiers. They were positioned in front of the entrance to the chamber that housed the weapon. Mason swallowed hard. They had come this far, but this was the moment of truth. He glanced at Era, who nodded silently, signaling for him to prepare. This was the moment that would decide everything. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. Mason's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the door. The guards stood in front of the entrance to the chamber, their rifles at the ready. Every step Mason took felt heavier, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. They were so close. Everything they had done up to this point had led them here. But now, as they faced the final obstacle, doubt crept in. Could they do this? Could they stop Cavil? Era moved silently, her gaze fixed on the guards. She was always calm, always focused. Mason could feel her confidence, but he couldn't shake his own fear. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for everything. The weapon inside that chamber could destroy planets, could end entire civilizations. If they failed, it would be the end for everyone. He glanced at Era. What's the plan? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the area, calculating, thinking. Then, in a low voice, she said, I will handle the guards. You get inside and destroy the weapon. Mason opened his mouth to protest, but Era held up a hand, silencing him. I know you doubt yourself, she said softly, but you have a strength in you that even you don't understand yet. Trust yourself, Mason. You can do this. Mason felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Her words gave him strength, but it was still hard to believe. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. All he had was his mind, and in a world where power and weapons ruled, that didn't feel like enough. I don't have any weapons, he said. How am I supposed to fight my way in? Era gave him a sharp look. You don't need weapons. You have something far more powerful. Your mind. She turned toward the guards, moving silently. In an instant, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows. Mason didn't have time to think. He sprinted toward the door, trying to move as quietly as possible. His breath came in short bursts, and his hands were clammy, but his resolve remained. This was it. No more running. He was going to face Cavil's weapon head-on. The door was reinforced, but it wasn't locked. Mason quickly accessed the control panel beside it. His fingers worked quickly, and in moments, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the chamber was dark, the only light coming from the strange glowing structure in the center of the room. Mason's breath caught as he saw the weapon for the first time. It was like nothing he had ever seen. It was enormous, stretching up from the floor and twisting toward the ceiling in a strange, spiraling shape. Its surface shimmered with a light that seemed to pulse, almost alive. This was it, the weapon that could destroy everything. Mason hesitated. He had no idea how to disable it, no idea what he was even supposed to do. But then, something clicked. He had built machines before, repaired them, improved them. This was no different. It was just a much larger, more complex machine. Taking a deep breath, Mason stepped forward, moving toward the heart of the weapon. He could feel the energy radiating from it, the raw power humming in the air around him. His fingers brushed against the surface, and it was warm, as if it was alive. He looked around, searching for any kind of control panel or weak spot. Then he saw it, a small, hidden hatch near the base of the weapon. Mason's heart raced as he knelt down and pried it open. Inside was a network of wires, glowing with energy. This was the heart of the weapon, the power source. He knew that if he could disable this, he could shut the whole thing down. But it wouldn't be easy. The wires were complex, tangled together in a pattern he had never seen before. He wasn't sure what would happen if he cut the wrong one, but there was no time to waste. He had to act. Mason's hands shook as he started to work, carefully cutting wires and rerouting circuits. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked quickly, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had no idea if he was doing it right, but he had to trust his instincts. This was his moment. Outside the chamber, he could hear the sounds of movement. The guards were still distracted, but they wouldn't be for long. Era had done her part, but Mason had to finish this. The fate of the galaxy rested on him now. Finally, with a final cut, the energy in the weapon began to flicker. The hum in the air grew quieter, and the pulsing light dimmed. Mason stepped back, breathing hard. He had done it. The weapon was disabled. But before he could relax, the door slammed shut behind him, and he spun around to find Cavill standing there, a cruel smile on his face. "Well, well," Cavill said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I was wondering when you would show up." Mason's heart skipped a beat. They had been so close. But now, standing face to face with Cavill, he realized just how dangerous the man truly was. Cavill stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You think you can stop me? You think you can save your precious planet? You're too late." Mason's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't back down. "I don't care what you think. I stop your weapon, and I will stop you." Cavill's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Mason knew the battle wasn't over yet, but in that moment, he understood something. It wasn't about fighting with weapons or strength. It was about the choices he made. It was about standing up for what was right. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever.